Good evening, citizens of Portsmouth, and Happy New Year. Welcome to 2022. And I welcome you to our work session today. And Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Mr. Barnes, Mr. Battle,
Here.
Mrs. Lucas-Burke.
Here.
Mr. Moody,
Here.
Dr. Whitaker, Mr. Woodard.
Here.
Mayor Glover.
Here. City Manager Jones?
Yes.
Ma'am, good to see you.
Good to see you.
You have the floor.
Good evening. Tonight, we have Deputy City Manager Mimi Terry. She's going to present the recommendations for the American Rescue Plan Act, the ARPA funding. And the goal of this presentation is to refresh council on recommended ARPA spending categories, seek council consensus on specific categories, and to request additional direction from council at a later date to finalize ARPA project funding recommendations. And before we get started in the presentation, if we can all give Ms. Mimi Terry a happy birthday, since today is her birthday and this is her birthday present.
19 years old.
Happy birthday, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of council, administration, and Portsmouth family. So we would like to begin by going through the American Rescue Plan Act. This presentation is really to familiarize you or just remind you of the categories for spending, as well as to seek guidance and direction, if we could, on a few items that we would like to move forward on, and then to have further discussion on those items at a later date that council may have additional questions or concerns. So we can get started. So as a reminder, the ARPA categories are as follows: citizen direct payments, homelessness, business support, broadband initiative, public health and safety, infrastructure, water and sewer, community, recreation programs and facilities. Again, we have been approved for $56 million through the ARPA funding. We have received $28 million to date, and we are expecting to receive the a second allocation sometime in July or June of 2022. We should. Tonight, we are actually requesting consensus from council on the following items: citizen direct payments of $5 million, homelessness, $6.4 million, business support, 1.2, broadband initiative, 3.5, public health and safety, 4.3, infrastructure, 2.8, water and sewer, 3.2. And what I'm going to do is break down those categories as to what is in that category that we're requesting consensus. For citizen direct payments, we're asking council's consensus to approve senior tax relief of $1.2 million, senior care incentive of $1.2 million, universal basic payments, $2.3 million, youth and COVID-19 incentives, $230,000. This category equates to $5 million. And after we go through, I'll come back and request consensus. Homelessness, we're asking council to approve the building of the homeless shelter so that we can begin that process. Homeless assistance, outreach for $500,000. That category equates to $6.4 million. Business support, we're asking council's consensus to approve the local small business allocation for business relief incentives to local businesses. Minority business development of $1.1 million. That category equates to $1.2 million. Broadband Initiative, we're asking council's consensus to approve $3.5 million. This enhances connectivity, economic development, public safety, and operation cost reduction. That category equates to $3.5 million. Public health and safety, we're asking council to approve to consent to police vehicle replacement of 1.7 so that we can begin to order that fleet. Fire apparatus of $2 million, which includes 2 trucks. COVID testing and supplies as we continue to test our employees weekly. That category equates to $4.3 million. Infrastructure, we're asking council's consensus this evening on the beginning stage and development of the Operations Center for Public Works. Water and sewer, we're asking council's consensus this evening to approve the sewer pump stations of the $3.2 million to rehab 12 of the 70 stations that need to be completed. Council has currently approved police retention and essential personnel. That has already been approved and we've already moved further on that action, and no action is needed by council on that this evening. Items for further discussion for a later date, but I just wanted to bring those items to your attention as well. The seawall replacement of $4.5 million, security fencing of $500,000 for the operations facility, Ebony Heights, $2.12 million, sidewalk replacement, $1 million, elevated tank rehab, $4 million. That's for Churchland and Victory Crossing. Prentice Place, $6.1 million. Recreation field replacement, $5.2 million. Street lighting, $450,000. And crime reduction strategies of $1.6. So the categories for further discussion total $25.6 million. And we would like to bring that back at a later date. But if council would allow me, I would like to go back and seek consensus on the items in question so that we will have direction as to how you would we would like to move forward. So I would like to start with requesting consensus on citizen direct payments of $5 million. I'm requesting council's consensus for $5 million on citizen direct payments.
Dr. Whitaker, sir, you have the floor.
Just a procedural issue. Should this consensus be done during our regular meeting?
No, we do this. Yeah, we've done this before.
Madam Manager, sir, ma'am, you have the floor.
The funds have already been appropriated by council, so at this point, we're just looking for policy direction to start.
Okay.
Dr. Whitaker, sir, you still have the floor.
Yes. As far as the citizens direct payments, the 2.3, do we know how many families that's going to be impacting? I know there was some discussion about the Alice.
So based on the information provided by social services during one of the council meeting presentations, the discussion was the Alice Group categories, which are asset limited, income constrained, employed. First, that was for family households of 3 that had an annual income of $43,452. And that would be based on a $500 a month payment, which would be $6,000 per household. I want to say that can't equate it to 300. I have to do the math on that for how many exact households that would cover.
So did we ever reach a conclusion as far as the impact of those who receive TANF being able to receive these funds as well?
We did, and we determined that they could receive a one-time only
Right,
payment,
okay,
but not an ongoing payment.
right. So is that one-time payment included in the 2.3 as well?
It would,
It will, okay,
and basically what we would need, is a proration, if you will, of the 2.3, what percentage would go to those in the Alice category, and what percentage would go to those one-time payments.
and is that a council decision or
That's
management?
a council decision.
Okay, so are you expecting us to reach that this evening? What portion go?
Ideally, what we can do is come back with a recommendation,
Okay,
because we're just talking about the first set of funds
right, okay.
that we have. We have another allotment that's coming that we can then fine tune if there's a desire to do something different.
Mhm. So at our next meeting, is that what you're saying as far as how it would be allocated?
Yes.
Okay,
At the next meeting, what we'll do is come back and show how we're allocating those funds. And of course, we won't allocate them all in that time frame. And so if there needs to be adjustments, we will be able to make those adjustments.
okay. So you want the consensus, so do we wait for that, or you
No.
want the consensus tonight?
We want the consensus tonight so that
Okay.
we know what we're working with, and we can
Okay.
work out the formula so that we can begin to prepare for what we need to put in place so that we can start administering the funds.
Okay, okay.
Are you done, sir?
Yes.
Councilmember Moody, sir, you have the floor.
In these categories, are any of the funding contingent upon the recipients being fully vaccinated?
Yes.
Which ones?
The Alice category,
Yeah.
What?
the Alice category, the households that are households of that make a annual income of $43,452.
Okay, so they have to provide proof of being fully vaccinated?
Yes.
Okay. I guess my question is, now that we know that being fully vaccinated doesn't keep you from getting COVID, and I know our public, we've had pushback from public safety, first responders on that as well. You know, I don't see why we have to enforce that piece of it. I'm not in favor of making that contingent upon people having to provide proof of being fully vaccinated, because even that definition is changing on what fully vaccinated is. It may change tomorrow, may change next week. Maybe you end up getting 4 or 5 shots before you're fully vaccinated. But one thing is certain, it does not prevent COVID. Like we were told over a year ago, you get the shot, don't have to worry about COVID. Well, I know people who've gotten the shot and have passed away with COVID. So I just don't think, I think it's good that we're taking care of some needs here, but I don't think we need to tie it to mandating that people get vaccinated. And in fact, even that federal mandate, we're waiting on the Supreme Court decision right now on whether that's legal or not. So it's a lot up in the air. I would like to see us not make that a contingency. Do we have that option, Ms. Manager?
Right. She has the floor now. Councilman Moody, City Manager Jones, you have the floor.
I can appreciate your comments, Councilman Moody, but the guidance we have is very clear. Unless it's a specific line item in the guidance, we have to ensure that we are addressing the impacts of COVID. And so that is not up to us. That's part of the guidelines that were submitted with the funds. And until that guidance changes, we're going to follow the guidelines.
Now, can I,
Sir, you still have the floor.
when you say the guidance, where's that guidance coming from? And does that guidance specifically say vaccination, or does it say that we provide education on social distancing, wearing masks?
Right. The guidance comes from the state, and basically what the guidance states is that there are certain line items that the state, when they submitted the funds or prior to, they identified certain line items that the funds could be used for. To the extent that we have been able to follow those guidelines, meaning that if it's COVID-related, it could be COVID education, it could be informing the public about COVID and the impacts of COVID, it could be a multitude of things. We've tried to be very open as to what that looks like as it relates to adhering to the guidelines. But under no circumstances can it be omitted, can we ignore it, because it's very clear.
But it doesn't say vaccinations doesn't have to be
And
part
we're
of
not,
that.
and we're saying that in order for you to receive these funds as an individual, it's one thing. The only way that you can ensure that you are meeting the guidelines is to be is to be fully vaccinated. Now, with an organization, yes, there's room for education, there's room for advising their constituents of COVID shots and the benefits or whatever. But for an individual, you have to be fully vaccinated unless you're specifically a line item in the guidelines.
Was that a General Assembly mandate, or was that the governor?
That came from the federal government down through the state.
Okay. But because these are individuals and not a group, we can't do the education
Correct.
route. We're doing the vaccination.
And that's something that we have implemented to ensure we were in compliance.
What if somebody has, I mean, it's a lot involved. What if somebody has religious reasons or even health reasons? So they can't do this.
They can't do it through these funds. I understand. We're dealing with that from a staff perspective.
Yeah.
We get it, but these funds are very restrictive, and we have to adhere to them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Councilman Battle, sir, you have the floor.
Recently, we joined what is called the Southside Network Authority. This is where we build a connective ring around the cities in our area, which would include Portsmouth, Norfolk, Virginia Beach, Hampton, Newport News. Now, each city is allowed 20% of the shares in the company.
Excuse me, Mr. Battle, sir, I didn't mean to stop your train of thought, but right now we're talking on the ARPA funds,
Citizens direct payment.
and I know that,
Well, Broadband Initiative, sir.
It's the citizens direct payment.
yes, but we're talking about the citizens' direct payment right now, sir.
Oh, okay.
You can certainly come back with that thought, but we just wanted to clear
I
up
will,
because they were
sir.
going to ask for a consensus on the citizen direct payment. Is that
Well-
correct?
Well, the reason I'm doing this, Mr. Mayor, is we would probably, might need some adjustments in approving the total, this total thing. They might need to take some monies from one place and put it in another. That's why I wanted to, bring this before we gave a consensus on this total thing. Are you understanding? Am I making myself clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, the Broadband Initiative, again, is an investment, basically, of the 5 cities to put a connective ring around the cities and tie into the main frame, which is in Virginia Beach. We all were allowed 20% of the stock. The initiative here says that we'll do 3.5 million, and that will equate to 14% of the stock, which would leave 6% stock out there. Now, if we just do 14% of the stock, then Virginia Beach and Norfolk have already stated that they would like to buy all the existing shares. Now, with this investment, we will get a return, maybe quarterly, maybe every twice a year or once a year. But I think it would be smart for the city to buy the total amount of shares that we can, because 2 years down the road, when they give the breakdown, I don't want them to say, well, Portsmouth, who didn't buy all its shares, and Virginia Beach bought its shares, and they're getting an extra $2 million a year for the shares that they got from Portsmouth. Now, the 3.5 million is an adequate amount, but I would suggest that we get the total amount of stock, and that funding can either come from Aqua funds or somewhere else, I assume. But I think it's not a good investment to leave those stock out there for Norfolk or Virginia Beach to gobble up and, you know, get an advantage into the distribution of the funds. And that's why I wanted to bring that to our attention before we approved the whole thing, because Ms. Manager very well might want to make some adjustments here or at another point of payment.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Whitaker, sir, you have the floor.
To bring this back to the citizens' direct payment in regards to, I thought the issue Mr. Battle was raising was about transferring funds within, I guess, the allocations. It still has that flexibility if you like.
Right.
Is that
Yes,
correct?
that's correct.
And so you would just come back to council and bring that to vote for consensus?
Yes,
Yeah,
that's correct.
okay.
Thank you, sir.
Because keep in mind, this is a 2-year category we're discussing here.
Right.
Now, the only issue, and we can talk about it as we go through, there's a time limit on the broadband payment that's this month. And so we need to be on, and that, the next meeting is going to, we can take some more time to talk about that. But that is a time limit there.
Thank you, ma'am. I do have a question for you, Madam Ms. Terry. On the categories of the ALICE payments and the TANF payment categories, I know that you indicated that there's some limitations on one of those categories in terms of when or what amount of payment they can receive. I believe it was TANF. I know that during the discussion, as I'm trying to refresh my memory, we talked about some other components of a citizen's direct payment being tied to perhaps workforce development. Is that no longer a part of any direct payment?
No, we're looking at workforce development separately,
Okay,
outside of these funds.
okay. Thank you.
So we'll discuss this before the deadline.
Go ahead, Councilwoman Lucas Burke.
And I guess, okay, it might be under, I'll wait till we get to that item. Yeah, I'll wait till so we need a consensus on this item. Is that-
Right, and in the meantime, before the next meeting, we can report, so give you some information to assist you in making that decision of how you would want to categorize that direct pay, so that you'll have the information, so when we come back, you'll be familiar, if that's fair.
Absolutely.
in the incentives for youth that's under the citizen direct payments. How is that?
Well, it's interesting, we talked about that at one of our meetings where actually Vice Mayor and Councilman Woodard brought up. So the kids that participate in the programs at the centers, we were considering giving them little incentives. So if you actually are, and it's a teaching and an education as well. So if you're vaccinated, your incentive would be maybe a little gift card or a free, or for us to be able to pay their fee for a program that they're in, that maybe the parents couldn't afford it. So if you're vaccinated, and then we could use those dollars as incentives for their just their little recreation fee or something to get them in a program that maybe they couldn't afford, or would take some relief off of the parent for paying.
And just to add
Madam
on,
City Manager.
just
you
to
have the
add
floor.
on to that, we have a number of organizations that provide youth services, and they do not or could always use additional supplemental funds to carry out, whether it's banquets, uniforms, what have you. And so this would help offset some of those costs by giving those incentives and encouraging youth to come to those programs and be involved in something positive. So it's just an incentive to target specifically on youth, and especially to get them to understand health, and regardless of what your opinion is about COVID vaccinations or what have you, teaching everyone safety of, if you're sick, stay at home, or don't engage, stay away from people. It's to try to make our community healthier.
So,
Dr. Whitaker, sir, you have the floor.
so by tying it in with the vaccination, you're able to fund some programs that non-traditionally we would not have.
Correct.
Yeah,
Correct.
that's excellent.
Ms. Terry, I do have another question, and I would ask that you could give us some clarity. What is involved with the senior tax relief and senior care incentive? I'm sure that citizens may want to understand what that is exactly.
So for senior tax relief, this would have to come back through council. We cannot pay ourselves directly as the city of Portsmouth. So in other words, we can't write a check to ourselves for a tax payment.
Sure.
So what we do is we expand the program so that more seniors could get involved in the program. And so what happens is that those additional dollars that are not budgeted really generates over budget, or we spend more than what we budgeted. These funds will allow us to supplement or give the money back, or put the money where we have a shortfall in a category such as taxes for this. So it's a shortfall that it is allowed, that we are allowed to use to buffer, as long as it's a shortfall in our general fund revenue. So by expanding the program that we already have, more seniors are able to actually apply and receive that assistance. And if we can supplement that shortfall in revenue with these funds. And if that's the council's desire to continue, then we would look further for other additional dollars.
Councilman Woodard, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, how you doing, Ms.
Hey.
Mimi Terry? All right. And this is still the program that's, we're expanding to $100,000 for our seniors to qualify.
Yes, we would bring back to council exactly what that criteria would be. We just wanted to have some ability to get started, because we currently have a program.
Right.
But we just want to expand it for the flexibility so that more people can qualify. And that would be just for a season, a short period of time. So we would be able to give that incentive based on these dollars that are through ARPA. And then it could be a 2-year program, it's whatever council desires. But we just want to be able to get as many people in this to give them the relief, because it's a quarterly bill for taxes.
Right.
So the sooner we could get started, the better.
Right. And this is still based off of, like you said, these funds. Once these funds run out, or once a certain amount of people sign up, that's pretty much it.
Right,
Right.
but one thing that I did want to just mention is that if it's council's desire during budget sessions after these funds are depleted,
Yeah.
it could be something that council looks for, alternative or additional funding out of the general fund for those revenues to be supplemented.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Dr. Whitaker, sir, you have the floor.
So, so the expansion of our policies as far as qualifying more seniors to update the cap limit that was in place, I think Mr. Moody brought it up. So we will deal with that during the budget session, or is that going to be?
No, it's our desire to bring forth a document that would enable you to approve that now,
Okay,
so that we can use these funds as soon as possible. And the next phase would be to continue it. We will address it during the budget.
okay.
So,
Councilman Moody, sir, you have the floor.
so the program now is capped at, I think, $30,000.
Right.
Yeah.
Very
So
low.
we're using funds to raise that level at this time?
If I'm understanding your question, yes.
Okay, to,
Supplement.
yeah, to what level?
So at this point, right now, as low as like $30,000. What we could probably provide, what we can provide is council has to make the determination of what the cap needs, what they would like the cap to be. It could be $60,000, it could be 70. I have to go back to what we've provided before and just resubmit that so council can make the determination. But this was just to get us approved so that we can move forward with that and to set the cap. Because it could be, it's your decision. It could be $60,000, it could be, $50,000 per household. But it would be council's determination as to where you set that limit.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that limit has not been adjusted since
Correct.
the
Correct.
late 70s.
Right.
Correct.
But at this time, that's going to be for further discussion and determination by this council.
For these dollars, yes. And then if you desire to change the limit across the board, regardless, that would come at budget session. So that council can make if it's council's desire to change the limit moving forward, that would be during the budget session. And you would make those recommendations to us, and then during the budget session, we would change that cap permanently.
Well, it would probably be good for budget planning purposes that we determine prior to the budget season on where we want that cap to be.
Correct. So we would bring that back to you during a council meeting so that we can have that prepared for the budget.
Thanks.
Yeah, so
Dr. Whitaker, sir, you have the floor.
So that's what I was going to, so management is going to make a recommendation to us as to what that present value is of
Correct.
$38,000 from 40 years ago.
Correct. And in
Okay.
addition to that, we're going to look at we did the comparable analysis of the other localities
Okay.
to see where they are, and we will provide all of that information and provide you with our recommendation at that point.
Okay.
And one last question, Ms. Terry, I wanted to ask. I wasn't sure if you probably covered it, but I don't know if I heard you, about the senior care incentive.
Right. We got off track. I'm
Right.
sorry.
Yeah, right.
So the recommendation for the senior care incentive is that seniors spend a lot of money on expenses for health, insurance for day-to-day. So the incentive was to provide them with either a gift card with one of the health or like CVS's, Walmart, to give them that incentive to say, hey, take $50, take $25, and let that pay for your care. It could be $200. It's just how far we could go with the funds that we have based on how many seniors have been vaccinated. I think it was about 15,000 seniors that had been vaccinated. So based on what we could actually do with the funds we had, we wanted to be able to give them something to just give them a little break on their health care needs or their day-to-day.
Thank you, ma'am.
Is it going to be to a particular vendor, or will it give them the flexibility of going where they would like to go?
Flexibility, because we did work, when this first came up, we started working with a vendor who could do preloaded cards,
Okay.
and that we can provide that so they could go anywhere they needed to go on that.
I think I have one last question.
Councilwoman Lucas-Burke,
Yes.
you have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you. So we mentioned that the second allocation is going to come June, July of this year. So will we have to come back to the table and come up with a whole nother set, or will we just repeat this grouping with the second part?
So for the second allocation, and it's interesting because it's about 25, what we have left on the table based on what we discussed here is about $25 million, and the allocation would be about 28. So where we would go with further discussion as we build to that 28 million, those items here would come back. No?
No. What we have before, if everything were approved
Right.
the way it is, you will have spent year one and year two allocations.
Okay.
So what we are coming back for are those items where we need clarity. And because everything is already allocated, it just so happens that the ones we're asking for consensus for happens to match the funding we have now. But there's nothing to negate the fact that if you approved all of the categories we have, you will have exhausted the whole 56 million.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I misunderstood.
That's
what you were
okay.
saying.
That's all right.
That was
I know it's your
my
birthday.
Thank you.
It's okay. I got you.
Councilmember Moody, sir, you have the floor.
Yes, Ms. Jones, does that include the items for further discussion? Are they,
That's a
Okay.
part of the 56 million.
okay?
So yes,
I
those
just wanted to make
items,
sure.
we have them in at those categories where you see them.
Right.
But it's up to the discretion of council as to how they fall out.
Sure.
You can leave them the same, you can change them, you can come up with something new.
Right.
But that's how we've allocated them for discussion.
Thanks.
Councilmember Woodard, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you. Yeah, one more question for further discussion. It's a lot of infrastructure things up here, I mean, a lot. And, I don't know if, you ever put eyes on the Ebony Heights, community. That flooding that happens back there is atrocious, I get a lot of phone calls about it. I think I have family members that used to live back there, and it's pretty much worse than what it was in previous years. And I think that was a pretty important one. Something that we supposed to have been looking at a little bit deeper, or probably finding some funds throughout the year somewhere else that we can get this done. I mean, people are literally riding boats to their front door. And, I don't think that no one should have to tread through 4 feet of water before you walk up to your porch. So, I'm just trying to, inform anyone on council or anyone, that's a elected official, let them know that it's pretty bad. And I just want to know how I got to the back of this further discussion page.
Yes, we-
We got any information on it, or is
City Manager, you have the floor.
The infrastructure ones are for further discussion, because if you recall the last meeting we had with Davenport, we were talking about the city's debt limits, and we also were going to explore, or hoping to get additional information on the infrastructure bill
Right.
that was just passed, to see if any of those projects could be constructed under those funds. Since that time, we have determined that most of the money is going to be allocated to the state, that there will not be any direct payments. And what that means is additional grant money available in the categories where we've already had a lot of success in getting grant funds. The only caveat to that is it's an unknown. And so we had those projects in there, and we debated about whether or not to leave them in there, but we had not gotten consensus on any of the projects we have under further discussion. That doesn't negate the fact that we cannot get consensus on them, but up until this point, there had not been consensus on those items.
okay. So it's just something that,
We just need
We-
the elected
it's-
officials to say, yes, we want to move forward.
would this add any, additional time? I know you guys got to come back, but,
We're planning to come back at the next council meeting.
yeah.
Because some of those infrastructure projects we need to start, in order to meet the deadlines that we have from a time constraint perspective. So it is our hope that we can come back at that point and really understand where we are from a grant perspective or where those infrastructure funds are. I don't know that that's going to be that quick of a turnaround because you have a new administration, and who knows where that administration is going to go with how those funds are going to be allocated. So it's an unknown.
All right, thank you, City Manager. You've been well informed of this particular situation and all situations, and I appreciate the information. Thank you.
Dr. Whitaker, did you want the floor?
Just for the sake of the presentation, it would help if we could stick with the format, and I'm not trying to diminish anything that anyone is concerned with, but I think we can address those more adequately when we get to them. And we're on citizens direct payments, and can we get a consensus on that and then move to the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one?
I think that is a positive recommendation. So at this time, I ask my colleagues for a consensus by show of hands on the citizens' direct payments portion of the presentation.
Okay. So we have consensus for $5 million for direct payments to move forward. The next item up for discussion is homelessness. To begin the project for the homeless shelter and the various programs for assistance with the homeless. I am requesting and asking consensus from council how to move forward.
You have heard the request. Do we have a consensus to move forward by show of hands on the homelessness concern? And that would include a homeless shelter and homeless assistance. Is that correct?
Correct.
Show of hands.
Okay, thank you so much. Consensus to move forward. The next item is business support, local small business initiatives, and minority business development, $1.25 million. I am asking for consensus and approval to move forward.
You have heard the request, and there is a ask for consensus by show of hands.
Thank you so much. Broadband Initiative. I am asking for consensus to move forward on Broadband Initiative, approval by council.
Mr. Battle, sir, would you like the floor?
Yes, I'd just like for us to consume all the stock available to us, which would be $5 million rather than $3.5 million. If we don't get this stock north of Virginia Beach, scoop it up, 2 years from now, they'll say that the city of Portsmouth only got a minimum amount of its stock, and the difference is $500,000 a year. So let's consume all the stock that we can for this initiative, and therefore we could get some funding back into our treasury possibly. But to get just 14% makes no sense.
Dr. Whitaker, sir, you have the floor.
The 3.5 million, that's allocated across these 4 areas, the bullet point that are listed.
Correct.
Okay, so,
I'm sorry. Actually, that's just what that's garnering us. There is no allocation across those 4 items.
okay,
Basically, what we have, and we're going to get into this more in detail in the next work session, but what we have is an agreement that's based on shares. And it starts with 100 shares, and there are 5 localities, and each locality is offered or can purchase up to 20%, which equates to $5 million.
okay,
And that affords you certain strands on the fiber ring. in terms of connectivity and those things.
Okay, so the issue that Councilman Battle is raising, can we get some clarity on that as far as this 3.5?
Yes, we're going to talk about that at the next meeting.
At the next, okay, all right.
And we have that presentation coming up
Okay,
next.
all right, thank you.
So are we holding?
That's what
Okay.
the next session is.
So based on the ask and request for consensus, do we want to postpone that until we hear the broadband presentation?
Yes.
Is that the pleasure of my colleagues?
Yes,
Okay, then we'll hold off on getting the consensus for the broadband until after we have heard the presentation.
Okay. Perfect. I am asking council's consensus and approval for public health and safety of $4.3 million.
Do we have a consensus, please, by show of hands, for public safety, health and safety?
Thank you. I am asking the consensus of council to approve the infrastructure for the operations public works facility of $2.8 million.
We have the request for a consensus for 2.8 for operations, by show of hands.
I have a question, Mr. Mayor.
Dr. Whitaker, you have the floor, sir.
The question for our city manager, it ties into actually infrastructure in the next one. The infrastructure bill, have we received guidance yet as far as how those funds can be used, instructions?
At this point, the only information that we've been able to receive, and I have our city engineers here too to speak to it more specifically if need be, but the only information we've received is that it's going to be allocated to the state,
Right.
and then we will be, as a locality, will be able to apply for the different funds through grants.
So do we know if any of these projects will be eligible for those funds? Through
We
the
do.
infrastructure?
We do, because we have been successful in getting stormwater-related grants. We've been successful in getting a variety of grants, but I can tell you, an operations center is not going to meet the
Okay.
cut.
Okay.
And to the other point, what you have before you is one of a list of projects that we need to do as it relates to flooding and infrastructure needs. We've tried to put the ones that have already been designed so that we can get them done faster and within the time constraints that we have. That's why the ones are before you instead of others.
Right. Once again, the reason I'm asking that is because if it's any way we can use the infrastructure money to substitute where we can put those funds towards direct payments or helping seniors relieve.
Exactly.
That's why I was raising.
Exactly, and we tried to look at that, and that's why when we start talking about things like the seawall replacement, staff is in agreement that we can look at doing something else with that, because
Okay.
we're already using other funds to do that.
But what we're looking at right now, you've already scrutinized.
We
and said it
scrutinized and-
can't be
yeah,
used. Okay.
yes.
All right. Okay.
Calling for a consensus for the infrastructure portion of the presentation.
Thank you. Water and sewer pump replacement stations, we have 70, and we're asking to begin the replacement of 12 of the 70. Council?
Is there any questions?
One question.
Go ahead, Councilwoman Lucas
Yeah,
Burke.
I know we had talked about beautification or aesthetics. This doesn't include any of that, right?
No, this is just to help
Just to
This-
rehab it.
rehab it.
Okay, so can we look at that at a future date somewhere along the
That's,
line?
yes.
I think you're talking about the water towers?
Yes.
The water towers is under further discussion. This is not
Okay.
the water towers, this is
Okay.
something totally different. Yes.
Thank you.
So you have heard the request. Can we have a show of consensus by showing our hands on the water and sewer item?
Let me ask, can I just get a question, Mr. Lamb?
Councilmember Battle, you have the floor, sir.
This rehabilitation, how long are they expected to be able to function properly once they've been redone?
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council. You asked a question about rehabilitation for the sanitary sewer pump stations. You typically add another 10 to 15 years of life to the station once you rehabilitate it.
And how many do we have in that shape?
And they just, for this,
For that
for this
fits?
project, they select a number, and basically they're trying to work on the number within the budgeted amount.
I mean,
Specifically, I can't answer the question as to how many that are in that shape. We can follow up with additional information later.
yes. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Terry?
I am asking council's consensus to approve the water and sewer projects for the sewer pump station replacements. So again, council has already approved the previous action for the 4.7 million. And so for further discussion, we will be bringing these items back to council as we continue to move through these opera fund approval.
Dr. Whitaker, sir, you have the floor.
Yes, this for the city manager. As we look at the further items, under the citizens direct payment, where we have 2.3 allocated for those basic payments, is it possible for us to see if we can keep that program for at least 2 years
Yes.
through looking at how we might can reroute once we see how maybe some of these infrastructure
Yep.
funds might be?
Yep. Because we're going to have to make a decision on those infrastructure projects sooner versus later. I've asked the city engineer to put together a timeline for me as to the last possible date that we can start those projects and be able to finish them within the required timeline. And so we will have that information at the next meeting, and hopefully we will have as much information as we can get in terms of how the infrastructure bill is going to be allocated.
Okay, and I mentioned the universal basic payments because the other ones, like the senior tax relief, senior care as well, senior tax relief, that's gonna be handled through some code changes.
Yes,
And
yes.
I think the youth incentives, 230,000, I think we can find that in the budget, so that was the main.
Yes, yes. So and we understand that we want to definitely look at a variety of different incentives in the budget, and part of what we're doing this budget process is we will be bringing back new initiatives to look at and to have you consider, so that we are addressing our crime reduction strategies from a variety of approaches. And so that's one of the things you will see in this budget is how we are proposing to look at different ways of how we address that.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Ms. Terry, ma'am, thank you for your presentation. And I know that my colleague next to me, Councilwoman Lucas Burke, has one more question.
Change the consensus, but under the public health and safety, the COVID testing and supplies for the employees is $600,000. This is for our public health people who have not been vaccinated. I mean, where is the $600? How is that being?
The 600,000 is the cost of getting the test, ensuring that we have the supply to be able to test those that have not been vaccinated on a weekly basis.
Okay, and we're doing that?
Yes.
Yes, we're doing that.
Okay.
And keep in mind that we're constantly monitoring guidelines as it relates to COVID. We understand all the different opinions out there. We try to be diligent in terms of how we apply our health standards, and we want to be sure that we're putting people in a safe environment as much as we can. So we're erring on the side of being conservative. We're not mandating, we're not requiring, but we're trying to ensure the safety of our employees as well as our citizens.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Terry, once again, thank you for your time and your hard work in putting this together, and you and your team, and enjoy your birthday, ma'am.
Thank you.
Madam City Manager?
Yes, the next item on the work session agenda is a presentation about the Southside Network Authority. The Southside Network Authority is a regional authority created by Portsmouth, Chesapeake, Norfolk, Suffolk, and Virginia Beach to increase the speed and availability of broadband internet in the Hampton Roads region. This is different from the entity that you just had at the 4 o'clock meeting. The Southside Network Authority encompasses the region, whereas the Portsmouth Broadband Authority covers the city's geographical area. The first presenter is Mr. Michael Lockaby. Mr. Lockaby is an attorney who specializes in working with local governments on infrastructure issues, especially broadband. He is also the general counsel to the Southside Network Authority. After Mr. Lockaby's presentation, Assistant City Attorney Kelsey Swearinger will present city staff's recommendation on the investment for Portsmouth to make in the Southside Network Authority for the construction of the regional ring. All 5 Hampton Roads city councils will be deciding how much to invest this month. At your regular meeting tonight is a resolution authorizing staff's recommended level of investment that you are able to change if you desire.
Mr. Lockaby?
Mr. Mayor.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Hear me all right?
We hear you all right, sir.
All right, very good. I'm here to talk to you tonight about the Southside Network Authority's regional connectivity ring. We've gotten through design of this project. We've gotten through letting our construction contract. We have a construction administration firm under contract. We're ready to award the construction contract. We are in negotiations for somebody to operate this, for a firm to operate this system so that we don't have to stand up something like your city water department in order to do it. To give you an idea, it's 119 miles of 288 strand fiber. That means that it will, basically it's enough fiber to connect up a vast majority of the region and to have large amounts that are available to institutional users, such as universities, hospitals. It's bulk users, universities, hospitals, last mile providers, companies that might be interested in coming in and serving neighborhoods. It also provides for connectivity to the cities themselves. Extremely fast connectivity at defined and relatively low prices, and I'll get to how that particular piece is set up. The original idea behind the Southside Network Authority was that the 5 Southside cities formed this authority. It's formed just like you all's Broadband Authority. If you remember, I helped Kelsey write the Articles of Incorporation for that. So I've handed that all over to Kelsey at this point, but because she is, frankly, one of the best that you've got in the state doing this kind of thing. She's a very smart young attorney, but it's the same kind of rubric, except that the board of 5 members is appointed 1 person each by the 5 members of the authority. And I believe Mr. Jones is our member, and Ms. Jones, you're the alternate. We've come up with a cost-sharing and project participation agreement. Initially, we looked at numerous different ways of financing this project. It was initially predicted to be $23.5 million. As it turned out, we have bids at $18 million and $24.5 million. So right in line, there's a big gap there, but they're generally right in line with what our cost estimates were. We had looked at numerous different ways of doing this. We looked at ways of raising equity. We looked at ways of borrowing money. We looked especially at grants. And as we looked to state and federal government sources for the money, they said, and these are fairly high-level people, they said, you know what, we gave you a bazillion dollars in ARPA money. Why don't you use that? And that has really opened up an avenue for each of the cities to have a little bit more money than they thought that they were going to have, and therefore be able to cash fund this project. However, we needed to do this in a way, you need to have an agreement between all of the 5 cities and the authority in order to set out how that's going to work. And we wanted to have something that was at least simple in concept. It's a 28-page agreement, so it's not simple, but simple in concept, pretty simple to understand. Secondly, we wanted it to be equitable. We wanted it to be fair. Basically, what you put in is what you get out, and that nobody can feel like they're getting ripped off, or if they do, they won't be able to say that it isn't because of a choice that they made earlier on, that it followed rationally. Because I know there have been situations where that has happened in this region, and we wanted to keep that from occurring. And the final one was we wanted it to be repeatable. The Southside Network Authority is currently an umbrella organization for 5 cities to do joint broadband projects. Currently, this project is all 5. You might have projects in the future that involved different mixes. But this particular project, the 119-mile fiber ring, includes all 5 members. But we wanted it to be repeatable in case you had different combinations that wanted to do similar projects in the future. The way that we set up this governance model was, by state law, the board of directors of the authority, each of the 5 members gets 1 vote. You each get 1 vote. We set up a project committee, however. The board of directors can set up a project committee, and this agreement provides for that, where the project committee has 1 member appointed by each of the project members, but that appointee to the committee, that appointee's voting power within the committee is determined by the number of shares that the city they represent has purchased. So by default, you have the right to purchase up to 20% of shares. If some other city purchases less than 20%, then you would have the opportunity, along with other cities that had already purchased 20% and were interested in more, to buy more. So there's a way that those would get divvied up in sort of a multi-round purchase scheme. It's not an auction. They're all at a par of $250,000 each. The thought process being that 100 shares at $250,000 each equals $25 million, which covers, if it's our low bidder that ultimately winds up entering a contract with us, then we have plenty of working capital and plenty of money for change orders. If it's the other one, we're a little bit tighter, but we can still do it. So with that sale, quote unquote, of shares, you wind up with our $25 million in capital. It is anticipated that tonight, at least Norfolk and Chesapeake will act upon this and give at least $5 million. Suffolk acted on this last week and allocated $5 million to the project. There are provisions for a strategic plan. There are provisions that there is a contract that we're currently in the process of working on and negotiating for the operations, maintenance, and commercialization. Basically, we have contacts, and I know that you all have contacts, and could probably help us with those things, with community organizations here. There are bigger national firms that may be interested in coming in and purchasing bulk capacity on this fiber ring. That bulk that could in a fairly short period of time wind up spinning off some money, as well as being a break-even proposition. You're never going to get rich off this, but it would be nice if it were spinning off a little bit. Finally, and this is what I said that I was going to circle back to, the minimum investment, the minimum purchase is 8 shares or $2 million. If you purchase that, you get 1 strand pair, so that's 2 strands, which I'm told, and I am no expert on this, I trust Mr. Jones. Where's Mr. Jones? There he is. I trust Mr. Jones when he tells me that one strand pair is probably enough for Portsmouth at the moment, probably. Is that roughly right? But
Mr. Jones, could you come up forward, please?
at 14, you get 2 strand pairs, so 4 strands, and at 20, you get 6 total strands, 3 strand pairs. Go ahead, sorry.
Good evening, Council. With one strand pair from a technical standpoint, that does not provide a resilient or redundant connection should that one pair go down. If you're relying upon what municipal operations would be putting across this, you would want at least a redundant pair just on the off chance that you had to roll over to that. That's why one is not a feasible technical solution or what we would recommend.
And I've been told, again, by technical people, that there's the redundancy issue. There's also the exponential growth of data carriage issue. You know, you look at, this is a 30 or 40-year asset. That's how long a fiber optic cable lasts. More capacity is better. You're not going to be using less data in the future, unless the world changes very, very greatly. Are there any questions? I've really spoken, I think, to the financial aspects and sort of the control management aspects, but there's obviously in a 28-page contract, there's a lot that I haven't explained, so please.
Dr. Whitaker, you have the floor, and then Councilwoman Lucas-Burke.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. You mentioned about Norfolk and Suffolk purchasing putting in $5 million for their share.
Mm-hmm.
What about Chesapeake and Virginia Beach?
Chesapeake is also voting on this tonight. My understanding is that their city manager's recommendation is for at least $5 million. Virginia Beach has already appropriated $7 million, but they will not be we're acting on this contract tonight. I presented to them earlier tonight. Nobody hit me in the head. I made it here, so.
Okay, so the share, there isn't a share limitation? The 20 shares wasn't a limitation?
It's not a limitation. That's a guarantee. Okay, if you want 20 shares, you can get 20 shares. I have to admit that we did not think that we were going to have the problem of having people want to contribute more money than the 25 million that we absolutely needed. So the way that it's set up is if somebody buys less than the full 20 shares, then their that delta, whatever they didn't purchase, would be divided up among whoever happened to have appropriated more than $5 million to it. So,
well, there's obviously some return on the investment that the cities are looking to get, and it would seem if Virginia Beach is going to put in $7 million and Portsmouth is putting in less, then we're at a disadvantage because you said it's based on your shares, that's your voting power.
mm-hmm.
So why would we put ourselves in a position of not being able to have some equality there and as far as what happens? Because Virginia Beach will have more than one vote. And I'm just curious why it was structured that way, because it puts Portsmouth at a disadvantage to a city like Virginia Beach that has the revenue to do something like that.
I think that you would need to talk to your administrative staff on why that recommendation was made. But
no, I'm talking about why was the network structured that way? Because that's how the articles of incorporation were put together.
That's actually how this project participation agreement is set up. The reason why we set it up that way was because we recognized going into this that there might be one or more cities that said, you know what, I am worried about the downside risk of this because, you know, I've spoken about there being upsides to this, and there certainly are multiple upsides, but this also will cost $750,000 a year to operate. Okay, and most of that's just 811 locates, but it's still real money. And if we've got no revenue, then that money comes out of the 5 cities. You might also say, you know what, I can live with only having 4 strands rather than 6, and so I'm going to invest less. There's a cost-benefit analysis that each city needs to make about what their own needs and their own tolerance for risk is, and we didn't want to predict ahead of time what you were going to come out to. If each city puts in $5 million, I'm really happy. That makes the math for what I have to do very easy. But we certainly didn't want to presume that without having asked you.
Yeah, no, I'm speaking more of the control of the organization. And it seems that there's a lot of potential with this network. And you mentioned about bulk capacity, and I believe you're speaking to the opportunities for vendors to tie into that network. Is that what you're speaking to?
That's one opportunity, yeah. Mr. Stromberg?
I think that
I'm
might-
sorry.
Attorney
Mr.
Stromberg.
Mayor. I'm
Go
sorry,
ahead.
didn't
No,
mean to jump ahead of you.
I mean, we're all having a conversation, so that's fine.
I think, Dr. Whitaker, the misunderstanding is, I believe, Mr. Lockerbie said that Virginia Beach appropriated $7 million, and you were concerned about their having more control because they're putting in more than the $5 million. But they don't get, if every city purchases the $5 million worth, then Virginia Beach doesn't get to put in $7 million.
Well, that was my question. I asked, was there a cap?
Yeah, and that was the
Yes,
confusion.
and I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I noticed, if every city purchases their $5 million, Virginia Beach can't buy $7 million. There's only $5 million left for Virginia Beach.
Right,
Okay, that's
Yeah.
assuming Chesapeake is purchasing 5.
right.
Right,
Right.
okay.
Councilmember.
So Virginia Beach is saying, I'm gonna put in $7 million, all of the overflow, my $2 million will have first rights to.
It would play out different ways. I mean, if Norfolk also puts in 7 million, then yeah, they would actually each have a shot at whatever extra there was after everybody else had their first round. But as Mr. Stromberg says, it's all dependent upon whether anybody buys less than 20% in the first round. If you walk into the room with less than $5 million, then whatever that delta is gets split up among anybody else who wants it, who has more than $5 million. It's just a way of making sure that we get enough money to build the project while having it be fair.
Well, something's not adding up because you're saying that it's limited at 20 shares, which represents 5 million. So if Virginia Beach wants to put in 7 million, then evidently that's going to give them some type of advantage in the return.
It would not within the scope of this project. If they would only be allowed to put in 5 million, unless you buy less than, you or somebody else buys less than 5 million, in which case they would have an opportunity to purchase those extra shares.
Okay, right, well, I thought that's what you were saying, but then I thought you said again as well that they could still put in more than 5 million.
If everybody buys their full 20%, they only get to put in 5 million.
Okay.
Now, I'm not saying that we couldn't find some other use for $2 million if they want to contribute it into the pot, into another pot. We have numerous pots within the authority, but it would not affect control of this project.
Right. And so as far as the revenue sharing, is that on an equal basis based on your shares?
Yes.
Okay. And if I heard you correct, did I hear you say that the ring will cost between 18 to 24 million, 24.5 million?
Yes.
Okay.
That's, again, there's a lot of ifs, ands, and buts. I'm sure that you've lived in the world of change orders before at some point on some project. Sometimes you come in under, sometimes you come in over, more likely the over,
Yeah,
but
well,
you know how it works.
my issue dealing with equity is what is the minority participation plan, minority business participation plan, given you're getting dollars from government entities, and at this level, 18 to 24.5. What's the minority participation that's in the contract?
We follow the HRPDC's minority participation goals, and we're requiring submission of a minority participation plan, including subcontractors, at the pre-construction meeting, which will be the first meeting after award of the contract.
So what are those aspirational goals that are?
And I knew you were going to ask me, and I would need to go back to the contract and tell you, but they are equal to what the Planning District Commission does, so on the road projects and everything else
Yeah.
that you see PDC working on.
Any penalties if they do not reach those aspirational goals?
There is not a liquidated damages penalty. There would be a contractual breach at that point, and we would need to decide how serious we wanted to get about what we wanted to do. And of course, one thing that you can always do is you can issue change order directive to force changes there, but everything you do, of course, costs money in that respect.
Yeah, well, I think it's a serious issue because you're looking at $18 to $24.5 million. And right now, we don't really know in concrete if there's really going to be any participation. There's nothing in there that's going to actually hold them to it. And I have an issue when you all form these organizations and authorities and everybody gets rich off of it. I heard you say earlier it's not anything to get rich off of. Oh yeah, somebody's getting rich off this thing.
Sure, the construction contract.
And you
will
come
make
into a city like Portsmouth that is a majority African-American city. You want us to put up $5 million into a project and we can't see any return. And I've seen this happen before with the building of schools in this city. Okay, you get all this government money and it goes to everybody but minority contractors. And I'm saying to you as the attorney for the organization that is something that needs to be strictly adhered to. And I'm just disappointed in hearing that amount of money is being spent and there's nothing concrete. It's just a perpetuation of the racism that we continue to see in these contracting areas. And I would like to see the language. I would like to see the language that's in the contract before we commit these type of funds.
All I can say is that the minority business plan that is required to be submitted becomes, once submitted, a written enforceable part of the contract.
Right.
Now, it's the PDC standards, which the PDC has set under Title VI, and I understand that might not be sufficient, but we haven't tried, and I understand your concerns.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we've seen all of that before, and you have all of the fancy language there, but when the final analysis is done, you have less than 1%, and so I'm just disappointed in not hearing that there's something there, and I hope that our team will hold the organization responsible, and that we do see some type of language before we act on this.
Okay.
Councilwoman Lucas Burke, you have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Attorney Lockerbie. The presentation is awesome. It did produce a lot of questions, and a lot of them that I had were already answered, but you were speaking about the minimum investment amount, $2 million, and then the maximum amount is $5 million, and the shares that would be allocated. I know our team has decided that we only needed two shares of what that is, but how does that break down again, the $2 million, and you said there was 8 shares, and can you go through that again?
Well, as far as the strand pair access, at 8 shares, that's $2 million. You get access to 1 strand pair, and strands all come in pairs.
Right.
At 14 shares, you get, which is my brain dead, it's $3.5 million. You get 2 strand pairs. At 20 shares, you get 3 strand pairs.
Okay. And I guess in my head, when I was thinking about all of this, it wasn't related to the shares being the size of the municipality or, you know, like Portsmouth, you know, what our capacity would be smaller than Chesapeake, Virginia Beach, Suffolk. So that didn't play any part in how the shares were allocated. Everybody had a fair opportunity to be able to get the 5 shares. And I was thinking, you know, why, I guess our city, I guess Mr. Jones might need to answer, if we didn't get 5 shares, I mean, doesn't go to waste, it doesn't get unused, but how would we get a return on the investment of the 5 million? How does that money come back to us? How do we get to see some revenue generated back to the city for us to be able to help our city be a better city than we were before?
Well, you know, I'm not sure how the strand pairs would precisely be used. My understanding is that Ms. Swearinga is going to tell you about that in more detail in a moment. As far as money, the way that the agreement is set up is that there's an annual budget. In that annual budget, you need to pay your annual O&M. The authority will pay its own annual O&M costs, which is the $750,000, which that includes also some replacement costs and because things deteriorate, things need to be replaced. The fiber itself lasts 30 or 40 years, but there's lots of other stuff that lasts far less than that. Then, if there's money left over, that money gets spun off in proportion to the shares that each one of the city has at that point in time. And that would be spun off on a quarterly adjusting basis each budget year.
So $750,000 is going to be the annual amount that each city would have to pay, no matter how many shares they have.
$750,000 is the total cost of running it.
Okay.
If it has zero revenue and you own, you know, 1/5 of the shares, that means you are on the hook for 1/5 of that. On the other hand, if we make, you know, $950,000, if we have $950,000 worth of revenue, so we have $200,000 in, you know, in net revenue, the profit, obviously governmental entities don't make profits, quote unquote, but the amount that would get distributed back to the city budgets would be each 1/5. So you'd get $40,000, $12,000 a quarter.
Okay.
Councilman Battle, sir, you have the floor.
Now, Virginia Beach put in $7 million, and you were saying that the $5 million will be for their shares, and then there's $2 million that you guys have other parts to put that in. What do you mean by that? Are you saying that Virginia Beach knows something that we don't know?
No, sir. What I was getting at is that there is general administration and overhead that's not related to this project. We have a full-time executive director. We have my costs. We have an engineer who's on a term contract who sometimes does, very rarely, but occasionally does things other than this project. Currently those annual operating costs are low. They're very, very low.
No, that's not.
But that's the other stuff that I was talking about. That's the other pot, so to speak. That's not related to this project.
So aren't we responsible for that too?
We have in the past asked Portsmouth to pay a share of that, but that has been a coming with our hat in hand request. If somebody wants, basically what I was getting at is, if a city wants to give us money to use on our general administrative operations, we're not going to say no to that. But the way that this project is set up, there's only so much that can be put into it.
Well, what would be the benefit of them just voluntarily giving you $2 million?
You'd have to talk to them about that. But
You would know. You would know.
well, they still only have one vote on the board, no matter how much money they put in at that level on our general fund budget.
But you wouldn't know what would make a man just voluntarily give you $2 million.
My guess is that they'd want something for it.
Okay.
What, sir, did you want to come forward? Did you have something to say?
this is Mr. Stephen DeBerry. He's the executive director. He's kind of the, I'm the Burl Stromberg, and he's the Angel Jones of the operation, so.
Thanks. Just that specific question, Mr. Battle, I think they were budgeting ARP dollars, and they put $5 million in the 1 year for this particular project. The other money that was placed in there was a placeholder. I mean, they may have a special project where they want to come to the authority and say, we want to expand the network, we may want to do something. So I don't think that $2 million at this stage would directly impact the funding of the authority. So that, that's their decision to make, but it's not some secret handshake that would give them an advantage. I think it's for a specific project. So as Mike said, a year from now, you may want to expand your project, and you might want to invest additional dollars.
No, all I'm saying is, what do they know, or what information have they been shared with that we and the other cities wouldn't be at that point?
Well, I don't think there is a motive or anything. Again, I think that they had X number of ARP dollars, and they decided how to disperse those. And I think that's money set aside in case they want to expand or a specific project that's tied to the city of Virginia Beach. That would be my
But,
guess.
but that, I understand that, but could there be specific things that we could tie into Portsmouth that we don't know, that they know about their city? You see what I'm saying?
If there is something, it's not because we have shared it with them, or it's not anything that we in particular know.
But do you don't know?
I don't know.
Oh,
But we would, of course, if the city of Portsmouth wants to do a project, or the city of Portsmouth wants to work with one of the other cities on a project that is another project participation, we would of course be interested in talking about that. But that's not really the discussion that we're here for tonight.
Thanks for letting me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Dr. Whitaker, you have the floor, sir.
Yes, this is either for the city manager or city attorney or Mr. Jones. We just had a presentation earlier dealing with the Portsmouth Community Network, and Attorney Stromberg, you were saying how great that network will be. So what is the advantage, disadvantage of being a part of this network? How does this network benefit Portsmouth if we already have a band that we're putting in place?
I'll start it off, and then I'll allow Daniel Jones to fill in the technical piece if necessary. But basically, what this allows the city of Portsmouth to do is tie in to the ring that's going to connect us to Virginia Beach, so that if we ever determine that we would want to be an internet provider, then we would have that capability.
I guess I'm not.
Let me
you said
let
it
Dan-
ties us into Virginia Beach. What's that advantage?
I'll let Daniel Jones,
Oh, okay.
because again, I stay in my lane, and let him explain it.
Good evening, Councilman Whitaker. So the advantage for the regional ring in conjunction with Portsmouth. So you take Portsmouth as is just our boundaries. That's as far as we can reach. With the regional ring, that would enable us to tie into the region. So we could reach any other city as well as any business ventures that wants to reach any other city.
Okay, so stop there.
Yeah.
So if we just had the Portsmouth Community Network, and this is a network that is worldwide.
No, this is just, the Portsmouth network is just within our jurisdictional boundaries.
Well, I know that, I mean, as far as if you tie into that network, you can access information worldwide.
You can only stay within our borders until you hand off to an internet service provider.
So.
You
I
cannot
guess
get to Google or Microsoft until you have an internet service provider.
Okay, so this is almost like the intranet.
Yes, if you want, yeah.
So what would be the advantage of the intranet for Portsmouth, the Portsmouth Community Network?
Okay, so for the interconnection for the city of Portsmouth to tie into the region, as I mentioned, we could access for a public safety. So if you're talking when public safety, a joint operation for dispatch, or most importantly for us is to tie into data centers. So
Okay.
you have the transatlantic sitting in Virginia Beach.
Okay, so in our previous discussion, we were talking about contracting with PRHA and providing those resident services.
Right.
So what would they be able to access with that service then, if it's just intranet?
So with that, stepping back to that discussion and that authority, they would be able to access the internet. But
The
yes.
internet?
No, the internet, Google, Microsoft. But what the contractual we were referring to is there would be the ISP, there would be the Cox, the Verizons, those that were supplying that access, just riding our infrastructure.
Okay, so therefore, with what we would have through the Portsmouth Community Network, with those vendors involved, they would be able to access.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yes.
so so if that's the case, what's the benefit then of this Southside Regional Network and us putting in $5 million?
The benefit, one, is to tie into the other cities for municipal purposes. The second is for businesses to also tie in. If you have a business that has facilities in every city and they want to locate to Portsmouth, they can ride that ring and touch every other facility, but come to Portsmouth and build their corporate headquarters or whatever they want to say. It will also allow the city to have cheaper internet pricing. When we can get to the data center exchanges, we can get access for pennies on the dollar versus what we're paying now. So we would actually contract with the internet service providers at the data center, transport it across the ring back to us. Whereas the internet service provider sits inside of us and we're paying them that same transport.
Mr. Mayor, I know this is an item for us to vote on tonight. Can we get some more information in regards to the questions I raised regarding the minority contracting piece, as well as I want to make sure that this $5 million investment is benefiting Portsmouth above and beyond what we just discussed?
Madam City Manager, would you address the question, please?
Yes, and we put it on tonight for a vote, but we recognized at the time when we put it on there that there was a time limit. We thought a decision was going to be made on the 15th. We've now found out that that decision is not going to be made until February 1st.
Oh, okay.
So this is giving you information, and we will give you additional information because we recognize that we want you to, this is a complex discussion, and we want you to have as much information as possible. Ideally, I would never bring something like this in that short time frame, but we're not operating from time constraints that we set. The Southside Network Authority is setting those time constraints because they have a contractor that has bid, and if we do not exercise within that time, we could face higher costs because it could be post-pandemic prices at that point. So that's really what's driving this time frame, so that we can get the benefit of those costs. And so we would not have to make the decision tonight. We could table it until the next meeting.
And so can we get that information
As
that I
soon as
requested before, at least a week before our next meeting?
Yes.
So we can read through it?
We will try to get that information to you as soon as possible because a lot of what you're asking is already available.
Okay.
And so we will try to get that to you.
And Attorney Lockerbie can provide the minority participation language or agreement that you have?
Yeah, I can provide that agreement language. As I said, the specifics of the plan are something that is typically provided by the contractor after they have the contract and they have the subcontracts in place and we make sure they match up. But we can certainly provide you the contractual language. There's a bit of a chicken or egg issue there because the specifics of how the plan is implemented go with having awarded the contract. And if we don't have the money, we can't award the contract, which means that we can't get the information. There's a chicken or egg issue there.
But don't you have your guidelines, don't you have guidelines in place that vendors are responsible
We do.
for?
I can show you those
That's what I'm speaking
guidelines.
to.
I just can't show you who the specific subs are. That's and so I don't know how deep you want us to go.
Well, I was curious what your policy is.
Okay, I can
That's
definitely
what
give
I was-
that to you.
yeah.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Councilwoman Lucas Burke, you have the floor.
Yes, and Mr. Jones, I guess while we have you here, or can we get to, with the minority participation information, like a pros and a cons between us investing 3.5 million versus the 5 million, the 14 shares versus 20 shares, and how it would best benefit us?
Yeah, we can absolutely provide that to you.
Dr. Whitaker, you have the floor, sir.
And so the issue that Mr. Battle was raising earlier about 3.5 versus 5 million, why would we be a part of the, or if we choose to be a part of that, why would we come in at less than 5 million?
Well, I'll take ownership of that because I tend to be conservative. And this is something that it's new territory and the costs have not been finalized. And based on just understanding costs and how those costs increase, we wanted to be on the side of give us redundancy, ensure that we're getting the best that we can, but do it at the most cost-effective way that we can for the city.
But
So,
on the other hand, we'd be giving up some
and that's,
voting power.
and that's true. So, to Councilman Battle's point, I totally agree, and I accept that and support that, but I'm always going to be conservative.
Wait, one other question that I do have. So part of the 3.5 million, and I just need you to clarify that, the city had already invested in their own fiber ring, is that correct?
Correct.
To the tune of $10 million, is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Somewhere around there. So I think, part of your rationale perhaps was the fact that 3.5 million with the two strands gives us what we need. To the attorney's point, whether you have, and correct me because I may have misunderstood something, whether you have the whole 20 shares, each locality, or not, that doesn't diminish your voting power. Is that correct or is that not correct?
That's not correct.
Not correct.
The amount of your voting power
Mm-hmm.
on the project committee is equal to the percentage of shares that you own.
Right. Okay. So that's good to know.
Can I make another point?
Sure, go ahead.
Another thing that's driving the city's cost is the city has already constructed its fiber ring. There's going to be a need to tie in the regional ring to the city's ring. At this point, we do not have an estimate of what that in-kind cost equates to. So depending on where that comes out, it will be 5 million less, whatever that is. And we don't know at this point. They have to hire someone to do some evaluation of what that is. But there is some in-kind that the city has already put in that is, if my understanding is correct, that we've already made the investment, and for them to tie in and not have to do that elsewhere, there's some in-kind contribution that we would be entitled to.
So, but does that in-kind equate to shares?
It would equate to some cost value to which we have not.
But does it equate to shares?
Yes,
It does.
It would.
Yeah. We would need to figure out first off whether it's desirable to have it, and that's really a me and Kelsey discussion as well as a Daniel and the engineer for the authority discussion. That's a practical discussion.
So just for the sake of,
But yeah.
if it's 3.5 million, the city picks up and we find out it's 1.5 million in kind.
Yes, sir.
Are you saying that would give Portsmouth full voting, a full one vote equivalent to everyone else?
If that's the way that it works out, yes.
And that's in the guideline, the bylaws? Or?
It is laid out in the agreement.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So,
Mr. Battle, you have the floor, sir.
my understanding is that if we don't get the $5 million, and Virginia Beach and Norfolk buy that stock that is left, their voting power is greater than ours. Therefore, we've invested in something that there's not an even playing field. The only way we can keep the playing field even is to invest, is to grab the same amount of stock as everyone else. That, am I correct?
To have an absolutely even playing field, yep. And we tried to set up the agreement such that if that wasn't what you decided you wanted to do, we would be able to work with that. So.
Yeah. But I'm suggesting that to have an even playing field, it makes no sense to go into something and invest in money with not an equal autonomy in it. So that's why I say we should invest 5 rather than 3.
Well, I think we've heard everybody's input on that. I understand that the manager did make a recommendation that she would like for, and Dr. Whitaker had made the request for the information to be put together for our next meeting, and then we will be able to make a more informed decision. Is that acceptable to everyone?
Yeah.
Okay, so,
So just to
Madam Manager?
just to recap what we're putting together. We're putting together the pros and cons of what you get versus don't get between the 3.5 and the 5 million. We're also going to add any other specifics in terms of what advantages
Right.
of paying the 5 million affords the city of Portsmouth.
Yes, ma'am.
And then the SNA will provide the guidelines that they use for minority contracting.
And also the benefit that we will get in addition to just having our Portsmouth community
that-
network.
yes, that-
What is the
Creative
benefit of the
things
South?
that
the
we
Yes.
can do within the
Got it.
city scope.
So all minds clear on that now? Okay.
Mayor, I believe we still have Ms. Swearinger's.
Ms. Swearinger, ma'am, you have the floor. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Mayor, councilors, thank you very much.
All right.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council, not to belabor this conversation any further, but I think there's one more slide that might help some of this information, or the other presentation. It's not there? Oh, it's coming, okay. All right, so there is a little breakdown here of what you get for various investment amounts in the ring. I think, sounds like we're pretty much past no shares, so I'm not gonna talk about that. I didn't put up the $2 million 8-share investment because, as Daniel stated, that doesn't really get us anything that we can use. So I'm started here with the 3.5 million, 14 shares, and that gives us the no-fee access to 4 strands or 2 pairs of strands. And that is, as Mr. Jones stated, what serves our needs at the moment. It has that recommended redundancy. We get the 14% interest, and yes, we do. That does mean that we would have a reduced voting share to other localities who would be purchasing a 20% or greater interest. However, that voting share, keep in mind, they don't vote on everything. So there are still some aspects of this authority where the board itself, where Portsmouth always has a 1/5 vote, where they would still be voting on. For example, I believe rates and fees is still an overall board decision. Other construction capital projects are still a board decision. So the reduced voting rights, while that is certainly a consideration, it doesn't mean that from now to forever, every voting decision by the SNA, you would have this 14% vote on. Also, we don't know how much interest there is going to be on this ring. While some companies have reached out and said that they're interested and they want to be customers, it's a lot of unknowns, and that's why we were recommending the 3.5 million. We just don't know what the costs are going to be, and having to pay 14% of overall costs is certainly less than paying 20% costs. But it could be profitable, so that might not be the best choice. And then at the $5 million, that's with the 20 shares, that's when you get 6 strands or 3 pairs. As we discussed, that's more than we need. It's possible in the future, maybe we do need those 3 pairs, maybe our needs have expanded, but keep in mind that the participation agreement says that those strands that we get, we can only use for municipal purposes, so we can't lease out our unused strands. They would just kind of be sitting there unused, and it would mean that the SNA can't lease those strands out either. But we would have in probably equivalent vote to everybody else, and if there was a profit, you would get a larger share. So there's not, without the benefit of hindsight, it's hard to say whether one is a right answer or one is a wrong answer, but that's a decision up to you.
So,
Dr. Whitaker, you have the floor, sir.
so Attorney, is it Swaniger?
Swearinga
I
or
gotta get
Kelsey
it.
is absolutely
I
fine.
get it, sir. So although the votes will not be on every issue, as you said, that will apply to all jurisdictions, that they wouldn't be voting on every issue.
Right, so the structure of it, you have the board,
Right.
which is as it currently stands, and then this participation agreement creates this special committee. And it allows that special committee to vote on certain things.
Right.
And in those votes, whatever localities have purchased shares would have the vote based on those shares.
Right, so the point I'm trying to ask is that the times where all the jurisdictions will be voting, if you do not have equal share, at those times where you will be voting, you will have less voting
Right.
power. Right.
Absolutely.
And that's going to be across the board because all jurisdictions will be voting on the same issue under the same guidelines. They only vote on certain issues, all of the cities.
Right, if it's something that the
Right.
committee votes on, then
Right.
yes. that
And
would be
so
the case.
that's the voting side, and then on the revenue side, and I'm hearing you clear that, there's the cost, but there's also going to be the possible profit sharing that you would get from it based on your shares.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
okay.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Battle.
You see, I am very optimistic because even if we have 6 strands sitting there, say Virginia Beach or another city has used all of its strands, it very well may come to us and we could negotiate a deal with our strands. Or, as I plan to, I'm going to get with an attorney who will go over with me what we can do with the 6 strands to make the city better, to draw revenue in for the city. So this gives me an extremely optimistic outlook, and that's why I'm trying to convey to my fellow council persons that this is something that we should deeply consider investing in grabbing the total 20% of the shares.
Councilman Woodard, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Kelsey, I got a question. The $7 million that Mr. Lockerbie spoke about, they said it was for board fees or, just paying directors or whatnot. But it's also, I guess it's in the cut or is in the, on the wayside waiting for, to see if anybody else want to pick up the rest of those shares. So if we are potentially looking at spending $5 million and we'll get 6 strands, but you're saying that 4 strands is all we need for our city, is Virginia Beach being underserved by only investing $5 million with 6 strands? Because what, a bigger population, bigger city, is they being underserved? Or how is that actually working if we only need 4 strands?
That is probably a better question for Daniel. I do not know much about the data needs of the other cities.
Right, because, you know, this 2 million that they are putting on top of their 5 million is there for a reason, you know, it's some importance around it. And,
Sure.
you know, like Councilman Battle said, if we could go ahead and just acquire these extra 2 strands or whatnot and be prepared for, you know, any possible business transaction in the future, you know, it may be something that we must think of, don't look at. But yeah, could we hear from Daniel a little bit more about the importance of these strands?
Yes, sir, Councilman Woodard. The difference between 1 pair, 2 pair, or 3 pair, in a technical stance, 1 pair would basically carry all the data for all of Hampton Roads. That is no limit, because fiber all depends on the electronics you put on each side. So don't think of it in terms of more strands for bigger population.
Okay.
In that sense. And that's why we say from a technical point of view, ours is 4 strands, it gives redundancy. 6 strands from a technical point of view doesn't provide anything except it sits there. Because if we have a problem with 4, another pair is not going to help us in relation of resilience and redundancy. If 2 pair gets cut or there's a problem with 2 pair, another one's not going to make a difference because there's a major outage somewhere. So from a technical, only technical, but the difference between 2 pair and 3 pair is no different.
So, and you're also saying that you could run into some type of technical problem that the extra strands will come in handy on an example to that magnitude. That's what you're saying?
Correct. So, and that's why we say we want a redundant connection. That's why we did not recommend the 1 pair. We recommended the 2 pair. So you always want a redundant connection. But the reliability between 2 and 3, there is no difference.
No different, no factors. Like you said, no population, no bigger business ventures, nothing.
So if you take the same correlation, the undersea cables is not a big cable. That undersea cable is very small. We're talking sub 48 pair count of fiber. That's just how much data can go across the fiber. It's live.
Wow.
It's not confined.
Okay.
So it's not the number of fibers per density or region or population or size of your city. Our Portsmouth ring can take care of all the data coming ashore.
All right.
It might help to know, too, they came up with the idea of 6 strands for everybody who gets that full 20% share, because they asked the engineering consultant, what is the maximum amount of strands you could possibly think that a municipality would ever use? And they said, well, I can't imagine them using any more than 6. So it's somewhat arbitrary.
Right, okay. All right, thank you. Thank you, Kelsey. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, ma'am. Madam City Manager.
Is to provide a summary of the city manager reports. The first one, 2208, $18,000. These funds will be used to support activities in the existing home investment annual action plan. The next one, 2209, is for $34,569. These are funds to support ongoing education and public outreach efforts in the community to protect the environment and to keep Portsmouth beautiful. This is the 3rd year of those grant funds for littering and waste management control. The next one, 2210, $252,700. These are the funds that will be used to perform the initial assessments of Mount Calvary Cemetery Complex, and then, of course, Lincoln Cemetery once authorization has been obtained. The next, which is 2211 for $23,000. These are funds to be used to meet the needs of individuals and their families impacted by substance use disorders. The next one, 2212, $160,581. This funding will be used to provide preventive measures intended to avert substance use disorders. These measures include, but are not limited to, information dissemination, education, and community capacity building. The last one, 2213, 385,000. This funding will be used to support additional services for opiate misuse prevention, treatment, and recovery services. I'll be happy to take any questions that you may have on any of these items.
Are there any questions from my colleagues? Seeing none, then
Thank you.
you could proceed. Are there any other items?
No, that's it.
We do have council liaison reports. Are there any council liaison reports at this time? Dr. Whitaker, sir, you have the floor.
Yes, I just want to let council know that I believe it was last Thursday, the Vice Mayor Barnes and myself, along with the city manager and the superintendent, had a very constructive meeting. We'll be looking at how those ARPA funds can be used to help with the CIP programs, and so we'll begin a report back on that. But I think it was very constructive, and the meeting went in a way that I think there are some positive things that will come out of it.
Thank you, sir. That concludes the council liaison reports, and that concludes our public works session. This meeting is adjourned, and we will begin our meeting at 7 o'clock.